before Al-Qaeda had been completely destroyed, before the Taliban had been routed?
I don't.
In Afghanistan?
I don't. We had pretty well routed the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and closed the training camps, and captured and killed a great many of the Al-Qaeda members as well as the Taliban when we originally went in. The situation now, obviously, is that we've got to continue to be engaged in Afghanistan. It's one of the most difficult places to work in because of the territory, the geography, the terrain, but also because it's one of the poorest countries in the world. They don't have a lot of resources. And we've now got the added problem that's totally unrelated to Iraq, that in Pakistan, next door to Afghanistan, you've got a sanctuary, for example, for some Al-Qaeda that are still there, as well as the Taliban who move back and forth across the border. We'll be involved there for a long time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have taken out Saddam Hussein. I think we were capable of doing both. I think, in effect, we've done both.
But you didn't do both simultaneously, right?
Well, pretty much simultaneously. I mean, there'd been...
Osama bin Laden still, that's what I mean. Al-Qaeda is still functioning.
Well, but Osama bin Laden is wherever he is, and he's in a deep hole. He does not have much impact on the organization, as best we can tell. The important thing was to go after the organization, after Al-Qaeda. Even if you got Osama bin Laden tomorrow, you'd still have a problem in terms of whatever residue of Al-Qaeda is out there. We have had a big impact on Al-Qaeda. This is a significantly diminished organization, I think, compared to what it was 4 or 5 years ago. When we killed Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, in June of '06, major accomplishment. And over the last, I don't want to get into the classified area, obviously, but within the last year or so, we've had a very significant impact on senior Al-Qaeda leadership.
On a more general scope here, Mr. Vice President, what do you make of a current suggestion that you have been, in fact, the most powerful vice president in history, but in one of the most failed presidencies in history?
I don't buy that.
You don't buy that?
No, I think the argument that this is a failed presidency is just dead wrong. I think we'll hear that from some of our critics. But when I look back at what we've been able to do, we dealt with big issues. We didn't deal with school uniforms. We dealt with the fact that we brought down 2 of the worst regimes in the 20th century, and the Taliban in Afghanistan and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We were forced, when we arrived, shortly after we arrived, to have to deal with the global war on terror, which had not been managed properly before that. We ended up inheriting a situation that has been very challenging, but we've been very successful at it. And when you look at what we've been able to do, both in terms of our activities overseas as well as our operations that allowed us to block any further attack against the United States here at home, I think those are great successes, and I think there aren't very many administrations that can point to successes on that scale.
What about in domestic areas? What of the economy? The economic downturn is on a scope with, or on a par with the Great Depression. Why was it not a miscalculation or a failure to see that coming?
No, I don't think it was a miscalculation. I think we had good economic policies, especially in the early years. I think the tax packages we passed in '03, for example, produced 52 months, uninterrupted months of job growth. We've run into trouble recently, obviously, in beginning in '08 because of the financial crisis, as well as the recession. But those are not U.S. problems alone. Those are global problems. Those are problems that have affected nations and economies all over the world. That's not something that is just a U.S. problem. I think, as I look at it, I think we've been successful at intervening.
On the economy, you've been successful?
We've been successful at intervening economically with respect to the financial crisis. And that what we did with respect to TARP, by moving as aggressively as we did, that there is in fact positive progress. We stabilized, if you will, the financial system out there. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done yet. But the interbank lending rate's back down where it belongs. Interest rates are low. all of these things are moves in the right direction. And I think if we had not intervened as aggressively as we did, the situation would be worse. But I don't think you could blame that financial crisis on George Bush. I just don't think that's a valid judgment.
But what about, going back to the original question about seeing this coming, isn't that part of the stewardship of the president and the vice president and his administration, to see these things coming and try to prevent them from coming, rather than to act after they've happened?
Did you see it coming, Jim? You're an expert.
I'm not the president or the vice president of the United States.
No, it's I think we did see some elements of it in terms of our concerns about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And a couple of years ago, we went forward with proposed recommendations to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Couldn't get them through the Democrat-controlled Congress. That might have helped forestall what one of the key triggers was of the financial crisis. But I think, no, I think some of the best financial minds in the country didn't see it coming. We saw the 5 key investment banks in New York are no more, or have been transformed in a major way. They're folks that deal in this area all day, every day, and they didn't foresee it coming.
So you don't accept any responsibility for on the economic?
I don't think we caused the economic downturn.
Okay. Why do you believe that the public approval of, as least measured by the polls and other things, is so low? In your case, almost historically low.
Have you checked it recently? I don't know what it is.
I have. In terms of history of polling, goes on 70 years. The only vice president who's ever had a lower approval rating was Dan Quayle.
Mm-hmm. Well, how does that fit with the other?
Well, the question is, why has that happened? What's your reading of that?
In terms of, let's talk generally.
Sure.
About
okay.
Polls. We've tried very hard not to govern based on polls. That is to say, we haven't tailored our policies in order to appeal to polls. We did start out, I think one of the things that contributed to the amount of hostility that's out there in the body politic was what happened in the 2000 election. That it was as close as it was, and I think there were some people out there who questioned the legitimacy of our administration, given the way the Florida recount ultimately turned out. I think that contributed to it. I think the decisions we've had to make on things like terrorist surveillance, like on interrogation of detainees, Patriot Act and so forth, those steps we've had to take to guard against another attack have been controversial and been attacked robustly by our critics and our opponents. But that's not why we came to office, Jim. We did win re-election, I think comfortably, not a landslide obviously, but we went out there and put what we were doing on the line in the way historically it's to be tested in a democracy, and we got reelected. And we have been able, I think again, to achieve those objectives we set for ourselves. Now, over time, I expect that history will judge this administration in a fairly favorable light. I served in the Ford administration. I was there and remember what it was like when Jerry Ford made a very controversial decision to pardon Richard Nixon and fell 30 points in the polls in a week. I also know that 30 years later, he was much revered and much respected.